bad at it. So since the game is fair, so is inequality. We shouldn't obsess about it. Now you might say, yeah, but I'm not scared of inequality because I care about poor people. I'm worried about inequality because of its consequences, right? Because inequality, sociologists say, leads to crime and things like that. Well, neoliberalism will deal with that. So they won't deal with inequality in itself, but they will allocate some government resources to a tough on crime approach, which will suppress the consequences of it, right? So you shouldn't worry about it. We'll have inequality. Inequality is not bad, and its negative effects, we're going to suppress them in itself by throwing people in prison, for example. Now, and again, and that is fair, right? They're not fascist. They're not saying that competition and inequality is a good thing, right? That we should have inequality because it separates the weak from the strong and blah, blah, blah. They're not saying that. They're just saying it's fair. It's okay. It's an outcome of the game. It's fair. Plus, they do have a theory that says that global inequality will decrease. So that's between countries, not between people. Because if we all engage in the same rules, if we all have free trade, if there's no barriers, right, then they're going to be playing according to the same rules, and that should level the playing field a bit. Therefore, there should be less inequality between countries. And although in like metadata, that's not really what's happening, there is some validity to this argument, right? That if you would that free trade is better than unfair trade, you could make that case. And it's also true in the sense that with this system, since in the richer countries people will become poorer, right, and in the poor countries some elite will get richer, then statistically they will indeed be closer to each other, right? Not necessarily because the poor countries go up, but some of the rich countries will come down. So there, you could make this argument. It's not the worst argument in their arsenal. But now let's get to the main point, right? The main point here is that, okay, we'll have inequality, the rich will get richer, but actually that's not bad, they will say, because the wealth is going to trickle down like water to everyone. This argument is absolutely crucial. This is a pillar of neoliberalism. If this fails, the whole house starts to crumble, right? So let me explain this argument in a bit more detail. Trickle-down theory. The image that they want you to have in your head, which is very neoliberal in its nature, is a pyramid of champagne glasses. You might have ever seen this at a wedding, maybe. Imagine if you have champagne glasses and you stack them in a pyramid, right, like this. Now, if you would pour the champagne in the top glass, then it's going to flow over and it's going to fall in the second row, and then it will flow over and fall on the third row, and it will kind of flow down, right? So to put champagne in all glasses, you only need to fill the top one. They want you to have this metaphor in mind when thinking about the economy, right? If we just give money to the people on the top, if we throw these billions at Elon Musk, then he is going to spend them, and then the money is going to end up with lower things, and slowly things will trickle down. In a very graphical explanation, Elon Musk gets the money, he goes up, he makes it rain, and then them strippers get the money, right? That's how the wealth trickles down, because of strippers. So another metaphor would be that the rich have so much food on their table that some crumbs are going to fall off, and then you can jump and maybe catch a crumb from their table. That's the idea. So the theory is that if the rich get richer, their money will spill over because there's so much of them, and that will slowly drip down, and maybe somehow, somewhere, you will catch a piece of that. So that's a positive thing, right? It means that even if you lose, you will somehow, somewhere benefit from the winners winning. Now there's no like real exact theory of how this is supposed to happen. It's more like a promise or an assumption, right? That somehow, somewhere, if we just give all the money to the rich, we are going to get it back somehow. So that's trickle-down economics. This is very central to the whole idea, right? the rich gets richer is also good for the poor, because they will catch part of that increased wealth. Now, as Marxists, they would, of course, the Marxists, they would criticize this. They would say, yeah, but the money that the rich are making comes from the poor, right? They're the ones making it. So this is a bit very indirect way of redistributing wealth. You could as well just keep it at the bottom. And you know, doesn't this come from exploitation? Marxists would say, right? What about exploitation and kind of bad labor conditions in general? To that, neoliberals would say the following. Well, there's not really something to say to this. There is no good remark beyond Kies Vermi tennis to this, except they could only say, well, okay, this is true. This comes from exploitation. Well, they will never accept that, but this happens in bad labor conditions. But this will also improve, because somehow in the long run, the market is going to create more equality. How? Maybe because of technology, somehow that would increase labor conditions. And, you know, things will standardize. They say, but look, okay, we have no argument, but this is the real argument. The argument is, okay, there's exploitation, there's bad conditions, but people chose this, right? We don't directly force them. There is no slavery, right? We pay them to do so. And since people choose to accept these jobs, this is a choice. And, you know, you should respect that choice. Even if they live in horrible conditions, they apparently chose this instead of waking up earlier and being a billionaire. So since this is their choice, we have to respect that. We should not be this paternalistic socialists who tell people that their life isn't good enough, right? Well, people apparently wanted this. So that is liberty too, right? The liberty to be exploited is a freedom too. And we should respect that idea. So in short, yes, there'll be inequality, but that's okay, it's fair. Plus the wealth is going to trickle down to everyone. If the rich make more money, everybody makes more money. That is the theory here. Now, you might wonder, well, what kind of culture comes with this? That's something that I'm interested in. And so I have some ideas on this, but I want to say this very clearly. This slide is not neoliberal theory. This you will find this in no book, in no textbook. This is my analysis and interpretation. All right, so this is not official. This is just my thoughts on this. I write a lot on these things on my blog, and I want to share this briefly with you. Having said that, is just an opinion, okay? Because my bachelor is in cultural studies, so I'm always very interested in what type of culture we get when we get a certain ideology. And with neoliberalism, one of the things that I'm able to identify is that what it does to you, and I think you will recognize this, what it does to you is that it makes you perceive yourself as an investment. That it makes you see yourself as something you need to invest in, and that must yield a return, right? Everything you do must create some kind of advantage for you later on. That's how you should spend your time. I think that idea is slowly creeping more and more to us and getting in our minds. So, for example, if you are good at a certain hobby, then at some point the question will reach you, either from the back of your mind or from other people telling you, hey, couldn't I sell this, right? Can I not commercialize this in some way? Maybe I could stream what I'm doing for my hobby and get money from that, right? Ladies, if you have a good body, maybe you should take pictures of your butt and share them on Instagram, right? You'll get a lot of likes from people. And then later on, if you keep doing that, you'll get a lot of likes from men that you don't know, and that will attract more stranger men that will like your butt. And at some point, you could maybe get sponsorship for your butt, and that, ladies, could pay for your masters. So maybe you should consider that, right? And the kind of these type of impulses, I think, are increasing over time, this pressure to commercialize something, because everything is becoming this investment, becoming a marketplace. We even start perceiving things like love in this investment logic of always wanting to get some, then, you know, always trying to get better than where you are right now. We even, if you look at something like Tinder, we literally turn dating into a marketplace, including supply, demand, and bidding, right? So that's where culture is heading, I think. And I think you can feel what I'm saying with this seeing yourself as an investment. And the question is, well, what type of spirituality comes with it? What type of culture comes with it? No, officially none, right? As I said, this is my analysis. Neoliberalism is for free expression of culture. Culture is unsponsored. The government has no involvement in it whatsoever. So it could be anything. It is free in and of itself. But in practice, some type of these philosophies are going to match with it better than others, right? I think one of them that goes very well with it is motivational psychology or motivational philosophy. This is, I think, the real juice of neoliberalism. What are the real glue? What keeps it together, right? You have this slew of best-selling self-help books. See You at the Top, The Secret, The Law of Attraction, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, whatever. At any given moment in the top 10 of American books, there will be some type of title like this. And the whole internet is full of motivational quotes, etc., etc. You constantly get advertisements about this. And what it does is that it tells you that basically every problem can be solved individually, right? Your brother died of COVID. Well, this is an opportunity to wake up and try even harder, right? Everything gets reduced to individual effort and you dealing with it. So that's kind of how things are coped with. And in terms of justice, right, if you ask yourself, well, is this all fair? Either you'd get a nihilist response where you just say, no, there is no justice. They're just impulses, so enjoy the ride. Or you get this revival of metaphysics. I've noticed in the last 10 years, concepts like karma became very popular. Originally a Buddhist idea, right? But karma in the laws of attraction sense, that you send positive energy into the universe and then this comes back. And if you send negative energy, then, you know, bad things happen to you later on. This is all a way of denying justice, right? Because you assume that justice, that the universe will take care of justice, not the government. The universe is going to do it. And if all of this fails, well, you're going to eat ice cream on the couch, right? The kind of final comfort is found in consumption. So I think this is the kind of spirituality that goes along with it, right? You individualize problems. If that doesn't work, you hope that there's some metaphysical solution. And if not, you eat ice cream. Again, back to serious politics, right? Let's get back to actual theory. Okay. How does all of this affect the government, right? What type of politics come with neoliberalism? Well, in general, a more limited politics if we compare it to democratic socialism. As classic liberals, they believe that the main function of the state is to protect your rights, right? More precisely, your rights to life and property, to security and property. That's the core task of the government. And the government should have a constitution that guarantees that. So in theory, the state should shrink. The state should be reduced to just a legal system, the police, the courts, and whatever is necessary to enforce the rules of the game, right? Because it's about playing this game. It's about playing Monopoly. So, you know, the state gets reduced to the bank and Monopoly that just keeps everything in check. That's a theory of neoliberalism. In practice, in what neoliberal governments do, we have seen some different things. That's not the fault of the theory, that's the fault of politicians. But in practice, this has not happened. States have not shrunk under neoliberalism. There's not a reduction in force, as I will tell you later on. They actually have been making very active use of the state to enforce these market principles, to nationalize land, to sell that to big companies, as we see, for example, with the energy law. Mexico, to have big police forces, to have big armies, to invade other countries, to force them to open up their markets, as we saw in Iraq, for example, 2003. But that's not the fault of the theory, that's just what the governments have been doing. And thus you will see the paradox that in practice, neoliberal governments usually spend more money than socialist ones. That's not logical, right? That's not what the theories say. In practice, you often see that, which is one of the weird paradoxes of political theory. So it's mainly about the law, right? If we talk about economics, then the consequence obviously the government should not be involved in most of the economics, and it should focus itself purely on finance. This is called monetarism. It's the idea that the government should focus itself on the supply of money, because money is not a commodity, right? Money cannot be privatized. It has to come from a central bank. So the government has to deal with that, and thus that should be its focus. Things like managing the interest rate should be the focus of economic policy, not intervening in the economy directly, right? Just at the very source of it, the government should intervene, but nowhere else. Just protect the rules of the game, just protect banking, and then from there, everything else will flow. So since the government should not do that, right, it's going to retreat from other fields of politics. So neoliberalism typically comes with austerity politics, where you will reduce state spending. Now, other ideologies sometimes have austerity too, as we see with AMLO, for example, right? But what makes neoliberalism austerity neoliberal is that it will save the money on social spending. It will save the money on reducing pensions, on reducing social security, on reducing healthcare, education. These type of things is where they're going to cut the money away from. This is where the state is going to seek to withdraw itself on the neoliberal policies. And typically, in practice again, this happens in a kind of 1-2 punch fashion. This is a kind of standard playbook of what neoliberals do. This is again not their theory, I'm talking now of practice. And I want to tell you this so you can recognize it when it's happening. This has happened many times in Mexican history and history of other countries. Here's the game. First, when they get to power, they will create a deficit. There will be some kind of crisis, either because they will start a war that will cost a lot of money, they will take out massive debts to solve the crisis, which will create a deficit, or they will just manually create a deficit by doing tax cuts. Tax cuts are not free, right? That means that the state suddenly has less money. Somebody has to pay for that. So then they'll be like, oh, look, there's a deficit. And we have all this debt to the IMF. What are we going to do? Well, somebody has to pay for it. So, well, we have to cut, right? We cannot spend money that we don't have. So, hey, we're going to cut the pensions. This is what literally Carlos Salinas did in the 90s, created a debt crisis and solved that by cutting, eliminating federal pensions. And we're going to privatize, because again, we have all these debts, right? Because of the war, because of these tax cuts. So we need to pay this, right? So, hey, let's just sell this mine. Let's sell this telecommunication company. And so slowly they will sell everything the government has, right? So that the government will fully retreat. In theory, they will go directly to that. But since that is a very unpopular thing to do, they'll usually first create a problem. And this is then the solution to that problem that justifies it. So keep that in mind. Debt has there's a purpose to creating debt by neoliberal governments. It's not just creating the debt to then use the money. The debt will later on be useful to them because it will be an excuse to privatize. Then when we finally get to politics itself, neoliberalism as a type of liberalism is for democracy. You could even see democracy as a kind of market, right? With supply and demand and consumer choice. So the idea of democracy as in voting on multiple options is compatible with neoliberalism. It's a type of market. You could see it like that. But the difference with social democracy is that there is much less things to choose from. Because the government isn't doing a lot of things, right? The government doesn't own much, and the government is not going to intervene in social affairs. They're not going to help you, and they don't have the capacity to help you. And so the institutions are not there. So there's not that much to choose from, right? Because there are not many options. Well, you have many options, but the government can do a lot. So in practice, you'll be voting on things like abortion or the legal age of consent or these kind of things, just purely legal things. Okay, those are things that people can make choices about. But all the important things are taken out of the decision. Either they're locked in a constitution, that means you just can't change it, or it's handled by technocrats. Things like fiscal policy is not a thing that's typically left to the government. That usually is made independent, and that is just handled by neoliberally trained professionals, not by you. So you have democracy, but it is, I would say, more shallow than a socialist democracy, where there's more things to decide. Because, there's a stronger protection of these life and property within the Constitution. The Constitution is more important in the system. So the government is going to retreat, right? It's going to retreat from social life, from economic life. And what does that mean? Well, that means deregulation, right? The government is going to start eliminating the rules it had. It's going to start eliminating taxes, all kind of fees that companies would have to pay, with the goal of creating more freedom for businesses, right? If there's less regulation, if there are less taxes or fees or registrations that you need to do, then business, then supply and demand, then the market is less hindered, and thus it is more able to take opportunities as they arise. That is the theory. And that sounds good, right? But you have to remember that neoliberalism is an extreme ideology. It's going to try to take this to the end. So let's talk about what this end means, right? What's like the end play here? Deregulation. Deregulation in the labor market means that there would be no minimum wage. This rarely happens because that's an extremely unpopular position to take, right? But on paper, neoliberals do want this. They'll talk about it. They'll rarely do it, but they'll talk about it. So you would have no minimum wage. You would also have no labor laws whatsoever, no safety regulations, etc. at the job. In terms of finance, it would mean that banks are totally free in what they can do. They can sell you any credit, no matter how predatory it is, or no matter how much it will mess with you. They can mix savings and investments, which I think is already the case. What does that mean? If you give money to the bank, right, they don't actually save it. Matter of fact, they save about 1% of the money that you give them. The other 99%, they're going to spend it. And they're going to invest it in things. Now, if they invest it in loans, then the money still stays inside the bank, right? People put money in the bank, other people take money out. Okay. But if they invest it in actual investments, then the money will physically leave the ecosystem of the bank, right? It will be invested in China, for example. That means that if that investment goes bad, your money is gone. Because it's your money that's being invested into China, right? From your savings account. So if this fails, your money is physically not there anymore, and the bank goes default and your money is gone. In old times, in more socialist times, banks would be prohibited from doing this. Your money stayed literally in the bank, right? So again, this is allowed in this system. In terms of the environment, there are no rules. There are no limits. There's no environmental regulation. Ideally, right, in the case. In terms of healthcare, there is no public healthcare because the government doesn't deal with these things. The government leaves it to the market. And within the market, there's also no regulation. So insurance companies, for example, are not required to cover you. If you have a pre-existing condition, then they can just say, no, we're not going to sell you insurance because it's too high risk. So then you are left without that. And in terms of land and property in general, it would mean that anything would be for sale. Mountains, rivers, lakes, whatever. If somebody wants to sell it, it should be sold. and the government is going to try to sell everything it has, right? Again, these things take very slow, they take a long time to do because they're unpopular measures. So this won't start immediately, but this is kind of the direction that the ideology is going in. All right. Now, in the last 20 minutes, right? So in short, strong emphasis on individual freedom, strong belief in the market is going to solve problems, acceptance of inequality, preference for the rich, and the government should stay out of society. No involvement in the economy, deregulation, privatization. That's what neoliberalism wants. I'm not going to critique this from a left point of view, because I've done that before with liberalism, and the same critiques hold here. Plus, you can hear me rant on this any other day of the week if you'd read my blog. I will give some criticism from liberalism, right, from the right. So critiques from liberalism on neoliberalism. Some kind of shortcomings of the practice of the theory, not the theory itself, right? In the practice, we would see that, first of all, it hasn't fulfilled its promises. It's been 40, 50 years of this neoliberalism now, and we still haven't reached full freedom. There is no general prosperity in the world, and there isn't even real free trade. Yeah. Now, a neoliberal response to this would be to say that, well, we need more time, right? In the long run, it will work. You just need to be patient with our theory. Plus, we haven't achieved this yet because of these damn socialists, right? They're always in the way. Whenever we have elections, they tend to win. They change up our plans. So they're holding us back. If we would just keep power for long enough, we would have reached general prosperity in the earth. And thus, we have to be patient, right? There's some positive indicators. Also, liberalism would say that, well, the idea was that we had this fair game, right, with fair rules. However, in practice, if you look at Mexico, things only got more corrupt as the system went on. So the rules of the game are not fair, right? That would be a social liberal critique of that. Again, the neoliberal comeback would be to say, well, that's just an accident, right? That things went wrong, okay, because of individuals did things wrong. But the solution to this is to have even more competition, right? The solution to this corruption, to this elites, is to have more open markets, more competition. Plus, usually this corruption involves the government. If we had no government, there would be no corruption. So the solution, again, is to have more capitalism to solve the fact that capitalism has failed. A third critique you could have would be that you promised that there would be less state, right, in neoliberalism, except that has not happened. It hasn't happened in absolute spending. There are very few governments, I think only the British one, that actually reduced total spending. Plus, neoliberalism did its campaign in quite an imposing way, right? It did it through coups in countries, to imposing it from international organizations, coups like in Chile, like in Bolivia, not too long ago. So this is not really exactly the liberal way, right? Yes, communists did that too, but they're communists, they're evil. We shouldn't compare ourselves to that. So this isn't really going well. Plus, whenever you finally got rid of the state, then you get this economic crisis, and then you guys want the state to come back to bail out the banks, etc., etc., etc. So we haven't really delivered. Plus, it came with an expansion of a lot of punitive aspects of the state, like the police, the army, and prisons. I want to quickly talk about the latter point, about prisons, right? Because this is a good case to kind of pierce the bubble of this idea that this would lead to more freedom. This, dear students, is a chart of Americans in prison or jail. The graphic is quite clear, right? You have a timeline at the bottom. Neoliberalism starts halfway in the 70s. As you can see, in the more welfare state period, there were not that many people in prison. But after that, it rose immensely, right? To 2.5 million people, almost, that are deprived of their freedom in the United States. Now, to put this in perspective, This is more, both relatively compared to their own population, but also in absolute numbers than any country on earth ever. Right? I'm talking about prison, not death camps, right? Then Hitler would win. But prison, where you go to serve a sentence, this is more in absolute numbers than China has. China, a totalitarian country, has less prisoners in absolute numbers than the United States. Matter of fact, Bill Clinton is like when this peaked, right? During the 90s, second half of the 90s. Bill Clinton put more people in prison than any leader in history, more than Stalin, more than Mussolini, more than any of these people, right? So if the goal is to create more freedom, I think one element of freedom is being free, and that is not exactly achieved. So something must be wrong here. But as we saw, the response to this is to always ask for more market, right? And that's what I want to talk about briefly. So I'm not going to say that neoliberalism doesn't work. I'm not saying it's bad. I will say that there's a certain danger in it because it's a fundamentalist belief. It is the fundament is the idea that the market will solve all problems. Right? There's a kind of overriding belief that capitalism is always and in all scenarios the answer. And that means that if we're going to argue about things, as you just saw in the arguments I gave, the answer to any criticism is always a reassertion of the ideology. If I point out the flaw of capitalism, the neoliberals' response to that is that we need more capitalism to solve that, right? You always need more time, you always need more of the same, and things will be all right. And in itself, that is a fair argument, right? You could make the same argument for communism. You could say, okay, well, things went wrong in Soviet Union, and then your old school Marxist will say, yeah, but that's not really communism, you know, or it's just a stage. And once they were out of that stage, you would actually get, you know, the working class power and the state would disappear, and you have all these theories. So Marxists sometimes use the same argument. And if you accept that argument, you would have to accept it for neoliberalism too, right? The problem, though, is that this theory becomes a bit immune to criticism. Right? Because whatever I say, you're just going to say that back to it. We should just have more time. And I think that's not very healthy for political debate. So then I leave you with two questions, right? First question is a question of totality. Totality is a Hegelian concept. Totality means that both the good and the bad sides of a phenomena should be considered as part of it, right? You have to look at the total picture, including the negatives. And the question here then is, are the negatives part of capitalism, right? If you take corruption, for example, is capitalism inherently corrupt? Is that just an inherent flaw in it, an inherent shortcoming, or is that an accident? That something can be fixed, right? Corruption in capitalism is always used as an argument for capitalism. You say, yeah, but see, we don't have real capitalism, we have crony capitalism. So if only we have more freedom, more free market, then it would go away. Or the other logic, which is my logic, you'd say if you teach people since they're babies to radically follow their self-interest, you should not be surprised that they become selfish and corrupt, right? That would be the other logic, that the system inherently leads there. You can make up your mind about this yourself. But what I would ask you is, if you are a neoliberal, if you do believe in capitalism, how deep does this fate go, right? So we're on a path. We're on a path, and at the end of the path, there is utopia, right? That's in the horizon. That's the light at the end of the tunnel. The question is, how far are you going to go down this path, knowing that you have no capacity to deal with problems, right? Neoliberalism cannot deal with problems because it doesn't want to, because the government shouldn't do that. Government should only guarantee the constitution, that's it. So how far are you going to go down this path? Imagine you walking down a path, and at the end is heaven. Knowing that as you go down the path, inequality will rise. Knowing that you'll be increasingly vulnerable to economical crises, which increasingly happen more frequently. Seeing that every step you take, the environment is getting more destroyed. Again, at the end of the path, all of this is going to be solved, right? Knowing that authoritarianism is coming back, the communities are eroded, and knowing that you have no defense whatsoever against things like pandemias. Question is, how far are you going to go down the path? It's a question for you to answer, right? Do you have faith that you'll make it to the end? Or are you going to come to the acceptance that maybe I am causing these problems and the solution to them is not to do more of it? That is the question. I'm not going to answer it for you. I just wonder, how deep is your faith? Since this is a faith-based ideology, how deep is your faith? The same you could ask for communism. They kind of parallel. Now, some of you might be listening to me. The real libertarians have been listening to me and thinking, well, in Irish voice, I just don't give a fuck, right? As Conor McGregor would say. I just don't give a fuck. I don't care about the environment. I don't care about coronavirus. I don't care about communities. I care about none of this snowflake socialist complaints, right? I care about the money. So I'm not poor. That's not my problem. I'm middle class. I don't care about the environment. I don't care about none of these things. Tell me the real deal, right? Will I make more money under neoliberalism? That's the bottom line. Does the wealth trickle down? Now I'm going to be a bit mean to the neoliberals because I actually can answer this question. This is not a theoretical question. This is an empirical question, right? We had 40 years of neoliberalism. What happened? Does the wealth trickle down? That's the bottom line of it. In theory, it should, right? That's the intuition. More capitalism logically means more money, right? Now, this graph, ladies and gentlemen, is a very interesting graph. I hope you will remember it for the rest of your life. This graph shows wages in the United States. At the bottom, you have a timeline. You have the period from World War II until the start of neoliberalism. That's where the dotted line is, right? And then you have the period after that, the neoliberal period. In the first period, that's called the welfare period, productivity went up 96%. That's great. America does good. And hourly compensation went up 91%. Not as much, but it kind of kept pace. That means, in practice, dear students, that there is more money in the economy and you're earning more money, right? There's more money and you're getting it. Okay. Second half, neoliberal half, productivity went up by 74%, which, by the way, is less than in the previous non-free market period. And hourly compensation went also up with 9.2%, 10 times less than before. What that means is that there is more money because we made more money because there's more productivity, but you're not getting it, right? Or you're not getting a lot of that. There's a lot of money that is not going to wages. Let's say it like that. This graph is very telling, right? It also shows you two things. One, that something is wrong with trickle-down economics. And the other thing, it tells you that there's a difference between GDP growth and how much money people have. Very important. Also for Mexican politics, right? 2019, GDP went down, spending power went up, right? By as much, almost as much as the whole neoliberal period did in the United States in 1 year in Mexico. Now, you might say, yeah, but teacher, this is because of socialism, right? It's because we didn't have enough neoliberalism. The rich didn't make enough money for it to trickle down, right? Maybe there was nothing to trickle down. Maybe the government taxed away all this increased productivity. No, not really. Here we see the blue graph is the top 1% and how much money they made. That is, their income increased by 136%, 38% since 1980, not since 1970. It's slightly different numbers. And the bottom 90% only made a 15% increase. So as you can see, no, the rich did make a lot of money in that time, just not other people. You say, well, yeah, hey, 50% increase, at least that's something, right? 15%, we shouldn't scoff about that. So everybody made money. Oh, no, not really, actually not. You see, if you break that 15% down, what it really looks like is that the highest incomes of that got 41% raise, middle wage went up 6%, and low wage actually decreased, minus 5% income. So not everybody actually gained money in this period. You'd say, well, teacher, that's very depressing, but hey, this was about United States, right? We don't live there, we live in Mexico. What about Mexico? Things must be better. Do you dare to see the next slide? Oh, you don't want to?
I mean, yeah.
Okay. Well, this is the Mexican situation. So we start in 1994 when Salinas killed Colosio and consolidated neoliberalism. What happened? Productivity went up. Right, with NAFTA, everything, things were great. 176, that means that it went up by 76%, right? Because it started at 100. So we made more money in Mexico. We worked harder, we made that money. But we didn't get it. Because the blue line is median hourly compensation. Median, not minimum. This is not the minimum wage. This is what Mexicans median made. And as you can see, it went down 17 points. So we made more money, but your parents didn't get it. At least most of your parents didn't, right? Maybe 5 out of you did. What this means, dear students, is that we are making less money than our parents' generation, that our grandparents' generation, while there is more money. They might say, oh, teacher, I had enough of this, right? Please stop. Please stop. Yeah, it hurts. So I'll let you draw your own conclusions from this, right? Does it work? Yes, it works because we're still around. But it doesn't necessarily achieve what it promises, right? That's a different thing. How are you supposed to buy our house? Well, we are out of neoliberalism now. We're in different times. We're starting maybe different times. I think AMLO's reforming Infonavit to make it more accessible, but that's still not a great solution because you're still, you're still taking out loans. You can move to Durango. I heard that houses are cheaper there. All right. Anyway, so that's the end of my presentation. Do you have any questions about neoliberalism? Any questions or remarks? Maybe I've been very critical, right? So if you believe in this theory, this is a good moment to push back and throw some arguments at me or at the group.
I just wanted to ask a question. As you mentioned, it kind of phased out or went out because of the new president. But do you think that it is possible for them to make a comeback, not in a distant future, but like in 2024? Do you think that public opinion would sway back to them?
There's two layers to this, right? Public opinion swaying back to neoliberalism as a theory, I think not. Not in short term, just because of Corona. Just the idea that the government should do nothing. I don't think most people want this in these times, right? Or that we should, eliminate the imps. I don't think that's exactly what people are waiting for right now. So I don't think neoliberalism as a theory, I think it's not on its way up. I think it's on its way down. It's still strong. You still have major countries in the world, India, for example, who have popular neoliberal presidents. But I don't think as a theory it comes back, but it doesn't need to come back. It just needs to defeat Morena to come back, right? So the politics of it have nothing to do with the popularity of neoliberalism. It has to do with how well this government does and how well the opposition is able to sabotage them and criticize them. So as a theory, I don't think it will become popular again, but since they're all now the same party, right, via C por Mexico, if PRI and PAN go together, yeah, they can come back for political reasons. I think if I had to bet today, I would bet on Morena winning next presidential elections. But that is not a certain bet. Right? There's a good chance they defeat him and we go back to these policies. So I don't know. I would, if I had to bet, I would bet against it. But they definitely have a plan to make this happen. But I don't think it will be under the flag of neoliberalism. I think it will be under the flag of anti-socialism. Ms. Sophia, I couldn't hear anything said in the first slide. Something about poor. So Sophia asks, the theory of the poor, is it called the trickle-down theory? Is the idea that if the rich have more money, they're going to spend it, and that money will eventually end up with poorer people. So it is if Elon Musk makes 13 billion a week, which he did last week, some of that 13 billion is going to have to spend. And that money will then, on tips in the restaurant, and then it's like a system of tips. If the rich have more money, they're going to tip more, and therefore other people have more money, right? That then apply to everything. That's the idea. As I showed you with graphs, with statistics, that is not happening, but that is still possible in theory. And liberalism, the state should not provide equal conditions. No, not equal conditions. Equal rights, yes, but not conditions. And there's another red scare. Well, yeah, just criticism. Any other questions or criticism? It's a good moment to fight with me over things.
I think it down the means of production.
What do you say?
We should get the means of production.
What do you mean with get down?
Yeah, we must start the revolution of the proletariat.
Okay. Well, you can try, right? I think you would start by joining a syndicate once you start working. How is early compensation is measured? So this is people hourly wage. So this is what people earn per hour, and then they take all of that because this is measured via, because the government knows labor contracts, right? Via income taxes. So all of this comes together, I think, in Coneval, and they then take a median of that. So a median is not an average. The average would be higher because you would include the wage of the rich. The median is if you have all the wages lined up from high to low, which one is in the middle? So which one affects most people? That's what a median tells you. And in terms of what I just showed you is real median wage. Real wages, the word real wage, is a bit like, if you don't know what it means, it can be misleading. It's not the amount of money that's on your paycheck. That's relative wage, because that's relative to inflation. Real wage is how much you can buy with the money you get. So in very simple terms, how many tortillas do you earn, right? Because you could, like in Venezuela, people earn, but that doesn't, those millions. Real wage is not very high. Okay, I think you have to leave for some other class, so I won't keep you any longer. All right, so I'll see you next time. Any other questions, you can leave them in comments and I'll answer them via chat. All right?
All right,
Thank you.
teacher.
Have a nice day.
Have a good
Yeah,
day.
thanks, teacher.
All right, take care.
Thank you, sir.
Bye.